Hello everyone, welcome to today's Test Complete demonstration. My name is Nick Olivo, and over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to give you an overview of Test Complete. Now before we get started, I'd like to learn a little bit more about you folks. On your screen, you should see this webinar panel. If you don't see it right away, it's probably been minimized to this small toolbar, which will be scooted up in the top right corner of your screen. Just click on this arrow button to expand the panel back to its full size. And what I'd like you to do is type the word Windows inside that questions box if you're testing a Windows-based application, or type the word Web if you're testing a web-based application. And hey, if you're one of those people who's lucky enough to be doing both Windows and web-based applications, then go right ahead and enter both. Now while you do that, let me tell you a little bit about me. I was an automated tester for 8 years prior to joining SmartBear. And I spent the last 4 of those years using Test Complete. So you can say I like the product so much I came to work for the company. And I can see some folks are chiming in here. Jenna's doing both Windows and web-based testing. Janine's doing web testing. Rodney's doing web stuff. So is Scott. Gabriella and Tian are doing both Windows and web-based testing. And so is Jack. Fantastic. Well, the great thing about today's session is there's going to be something for everybody. And as we're going on, if you have any questions, just type them into that panel, and I'll be addressing all your questions at the end of the session. All right, so one of the things that I love about testing is that there's always something new to learn. You have new technologies, new features, new innovations, but unfortunately, all this newness usually leads to having a stack of test plans that look something like this. And while it's important that you run all these tests, you usually wind up having to run them over and over and over again during the course of a release cycle, and that's just plain boring. Go ahead and type the word boring into the Q&A panel if this scenario sounds familiar to you. I remember back when I was an end user, it was always really exciting when we were getting a new release ready to go out the door, but at the same time, it meant we had to go back and retest everything we'd ever developed in the history of the universe. And that just wasn't a whole lot of fun. And I can see some of you folks out there, Scott, Gabriella, and Jenna, you guys know exactly where I'm coming from here. Well, what I'm going to show you today will help reduce that boredom and tedium. By automating your tests with Test Complete, you'll free yourself from being chained to that stack of manual test plans, and you'll be able to focus on more interesting testing activities because Test Complete will do the boring stuff for you. So this afternoon, we're going to automate 3 tests against a stock trading application. You can work with this application either in a browser or using a more traditional Windows client. And today, I'll show you how to create automated tests for both flavors of this application. So let's talk about the tests we're going to automate. Our first 2 test cases will verify that our stock balance is correct. We're going to do it once in the browser and once using the Windows client. Our final test case will verify the error message that gets displayed when a user tries to log in with a bad set of credentials. Now, to give you a feel for what we're striving for, I'm going to show you what it looks like when these tests are finished. So I'm going to jump out of PowerPoint here. I've already got Test Complete loaded, and I've already created those 3 tests. So this one that you're looking at now is going to verify the balance in our website. This test right here will verify our balance in the Windows client application. I've got this script-based test, which is going to verify the invalid username and password message. And finally, I've got all 3 of these tests queued up and ready to go on this panel right here. So now all I need to do is click this button, and now my hands are away from the keyboard and the mouse. Test Complete is driving the system, and it's going to go through and perform each one of those tests in turn. So here we go. Our first test case has already been launched. We've invoked the browser, navigated out to our desired website, logged in as our specified user. We verify that his balance is accurate, and we close the browser down. Then we bring up our Windows client application, and again, we log in as our desired user, verify that his balance is accurate, and then log out of the system. And then we bring the browser back one more time, and we try to log in with a bad set of credentials. And here we go. You can see we got our expected error message, and then Test Complete will close the browser down. Now, when the tests finish out, you get this really nice summary report, which shows you an overall status of the test. You can see here everything was successful as denoted by the giant green check mark here. And we can see that the test duration was, just under 41 seconds. I can see the start time, the end time, and then down here I could see, that there were 0 errors, 0 warnings, and 3 successful tests. Now, by double-clicking on these individual logs right here, I can see a detailed list of steps that were performed for each individual test case. So right here, our first action is that we're invoking our browser and navigating out to a particular URL. And then we type John Smith into a particular text field. If you come down here, you can see exactly what text field is being typed into. Here's where we're typing in our password. Here's our checkpoint where we're verifying our balance. And you can see right here we were expecting to find, this is actually a negative value of just over $1 million, and we actually found a negative value of just over $1 million. So John Smith's stocks are kind of in the tank, but as stated by this little message right here, his balance was correct. You get this same level of information here inside the Windows application. Again, you can see, all right, we're typing some text. Here's the text that it was typed, and here's the control it was typed into. So we know exactly what's happening during the course of our tests. Now, once we've got these results generated, we can share them with other members of our team simply by coming up here, right-clicking, and saying Export. And what that'll do is take our test results, bundle them up as a web page, and then we can email that web page to somebody else on our team. We can attach it to a defect report, or we can just save it off with the rest of our test artifacts for later auditing and reporting purposes. All right, so now somebody out there's wondering, well, that's great, Nick, but how did you build those tests? Was it difficult? Was it time-consuming? Do I need to be a programmer to use Test Complete? What can I do here? So, all right, here we go. I'm going to close this down, and we're going to start from scratch, and we're going to build out those 3 test cases. So I'm going to start out by clicking this Create New Project button. And you can think of a project as a collection of related tests and any relevant artifacts. So I'm going to call this Demo June 8, and we'll click Next. And now Test Complete lets you work with many different types of applications. We can do Windows apps, web apps, Adobe Air applications, and Java applications. For right now, though, what we want to do is test a web-based application, so I'm going to select that. And then inside the web testing world, there are 3 different types of testing we can do. There's web service testing, where you actually call methods directly from a WSDL and verify that those methods are displaying the appropriate values. There's load testing of web servers, where we make sure that a website can handle X hundreds or thousands of concurrent users. And then there's functional testing of web pages, where we make sure that a website is behaving properly. So that's what we're going to do today, and I'll click that. Now in this screen, we can select what site we want to test and the browser we want to test it with. So I'm going to click this Add button right here. And then inside the page URL field, I'm going to paste in my URL. And you'll notice I can also choose which browser I want to test with. Test Complete has actually auto-detected all the browsers that are living on my system, and I can choose any one of these from this list. But for our purposes today, I'm going to stick with the 32-bit version of IE. Last thing I want to call your attention to in this screen is this auto run box. What this is when we start the recording process, Test Complete will automatically invoke the specified browser to the target URL. So we won't need to worry about having a shortcut or a bookmark or anything like that set up in advance. Test Complete will just take us right out there, and you'll see that in action in just a moment. All right, so now I'm going to click Next. Now, as we are performing actions against our application, Test Complete is going to take screenshots of those actions. That's called the visualizer. And this screen just lets us configure the visualizer a little bit more, but I'm going to keep the default settings for right now and click Next. And now this final screen is where we're going to specify what scripting language our project will use. A lot of what I'm going to show you today can be done without any previous development experience. However, if you are someone who has a scripting background, or if you've got a developer on your team who helps out with the QA efforts, then that person is going to want to work in code. And so they can choose from any one of these scripting languages here, VBScript, JScript, DelphiScript, etc. So you just choose whichever language you like best and take it from there. JScript happens to be my personal favorite, so that's what I'm going to pick. Okay, and now the project has been created, so we are ready to start recording tests. So to do that, all we got to do is click this Record New Test button. Now, Test Complete is going to minimize down to a small recording toolbar, and you can see here we go, my browser's automatically been invoked, and I've been taken right out to my target website. So we're going to log in here as John Smith with the super secret password of pass123, and we'll click Login. Okay, so now that we're logged in, we want to verify John Smith's cash balance value. The way you perform verifications in Test Complete is with a feature called checkpoints. And checkpoints let you do everything from verifying that the appropriate text is displayed on screen. You can verify that images have loaded properly. You can even do things like verify that database tables contain the appropriate information. But for right now, we just want to verify that text. So I'm going to come up here to this toolbar button, and this gives me a list of the 10 different types of checkpoints that Test Complete includes. And the one we want to create today is called a property checkpoint, because that text is actually just a property of one particular object on screen. So the first thing we want to do is select the object whose properties we want to verify. And I'm just going to drag this little finder tool right over that object. You'll notice that as I mouse over various items on screen, Test Complete is drawing a red highlight around those items. Anything we can draw a red highlight around is something we can create a checkpoint for. So text boxes, hyperlinks, radio buttons, pictures, you name it. All right, so now we've got that control selected, and you'll notice that Test Complete is referring to it as text node balance. This is the actual name of the control as specified by the developers when they built this web page. So I'm not relying on screen positioning or XY coordinates or anything like that. I'm always going to find these controls based on their actual name. So Test Complete's got some very powerful object recognition capabilities built right into it. All right, so now we're going to click Next. Now on this screen, we can choose which property we want to work with for this checkpoint. In my case, I want this inner text property here because that actually contains the balance. We'll say Next. And this final screen is just a summary of what the checkpoint's going to do. We're going to look at that that text node balance control and verify that its inner text property equals negative $1 million there. All right, now we'll say Finish. You notice here a checkpoint has been created, so Test Complete is telling us that was inserted successfully into our test case. Now I'm going to log out of my site, close my browser down, and once the browser closes, then I will stop the recording process. And to do that, just click this Stop button right here. Okay, so now Test Complete's going to take a moment, and it's going to render all those actions I just performed as what we call a keyword test. And keyword tests are just graphical representations of all the actions that were performed during the course of a recording session. And they're great because folks who have never used test automation before can easily follow along with what's going on in a keyword test. So right here, we can see that we are invoking Internet Explorer. And then we navigate out to our target URL. And then here we type in our username and our password. And then we click Login. Now you'll notice that as I select various actions inside my test case, this bottom panel is also highlighting. This is that visualizer panel that I mentioned earlier. And the visualizer gives you a screenshot of what the application looked like at a particular point in time. So you can see I've got the login link item selected back here. So this is what the screen looked like when I actually performed that click. So this is great if you've got new folks on your team who have never seen Test Complete before, never seen your application before, they're brand spanking new. They can just easily skim through the screenshots here to get a feel for what your test cases are doing and what the application's expected behavior is. All right, so now once we've got our test case created, running it is a simple matter of just clicking this Run Test button. And again, I'm going to take my hands away from the keyboard and the mouse. And while the test runs, I'd like to call your attention to the indicator icon that's up at the top right corner of my screen. Currently, it's displaying a message that says Playback. That indicator can be used to display custom messages to your users. So if you are doing a lengthy operation under the hood, like a database query or something like that, you could actually pop up a message there saying, hey, I'm running a lengthy database query, please don't touch. In addition to that, the indicator also provides a stop and pause button that you can use to interrupt test execution at any point in time. So that way you don't have to worry about remembering some obscure keystroke combination to actually stop test execution if you need to. All right, so once our test finishes out, again, we get that nice log file. Something I didn't show you earlier is that we also log images of what the application looked like both at record time and at playback time. So Test Complete is automatically storing a graphical audit trail of everything that was performed during the course of the test. So if you need to review what your application state was at a particular moment in time, you can do that. So the A lot of great information stored right here alongside your test results. But now somebody out there is looking at these results and saying, hey, wait a second, Nick, that completed sample that you showed us at the beginning of the session had a message in the log that explicitly stated that John Smith's balance was correct. Why don't we see that now? Well, that is a fantastic question, and the reason is that that was a custom message I inserted into my test after it had been created. So what I'd like to do right now is show you just how easy it is to enhance your tests. Here we go. So I'm going to jump back into my test case here. Here's our checkpoint. And what we're going to do is use these drag and drop operation palettes that you see here on the left side of my screen to insert a command that will write a message out to the log file if the checkpoint's successful. So here we go. I'm going to click on this statements slider bar. I'm going to grab this if-then operation, and I'm just going to drag it right onto my test. And you'll notice my cursor is being chased by this red arrow with the blue line. That's showing me where this operation is going to be inserted. I'm going to drop this immediately after the property checkpoint. And what we're going to say here is if the last operation, in this case, if the checkpoint equals true, and true just means that it passed. So if that checkpoint passed, then come up here to the logging palette. I'm going to grab this log message command, and again, I'm just going to drag that right on top of the if-then operation. You'll notice now, though, my cursor has this little blue and white arrow chasing it. That means that this message will only be written if that checkpoint was successful. So I'm going to drop that on there, and then we'll put in our message saying that John Smith's balance was correct. Okay, so we got that there. I'm going to click Finish. And now just to prove that this works to you, I'm going to run this one more time. The beauty of this is you can insert your own custom error messages, your own custom informational notes, your own warnings. You can post screenshots of specific items into the log. So if there's a graph or a chart or something that you want to make sure gets captured, you can do that. Additionally, you can post files into the, or excuse me, links to files inside the Test Complete log as well. So if your application generates a report, you could have Test Complete automatically include a link to that report right inside your test results, thereby keeping your test artifacts together with the tests that actually generated them. And here we go, our test is finished running. Here's our message saying that the checkpoint was successful, and then here's our custom message saying that yes, John Smith's balance was correct. So it's very easy to enhance your tests after they've been recorded. Okay, so now this is all well and good if you're doing web testing, but some of the folks out there who are doing Windows testing, like Tien and Jenna and excuse me, Gabriella, are wondering, well, hey, what about us? What about the Windows side of things? Is it any different? Is it harder? What's involved there? All right, well, let's create our second test case against a Windows application. So the first thing I'm going to do is jump into this tested apps node here, and I'm going to disable auto run because I'm not testing IE right now, so I don't want it to get launched when I start recording. And with that done, I'm just going to click this record keyword test button right here. And again, Test Complete will drop into record mode. Now, I've already got my Windows client application loaded. I could have Test Complete launch it for me. However, this application does a lot of just-in-time compiling, and rather than have you guys sit here and stare at my hourglass for 45 seconds, I figure, you know what, we'll just have the thing loaded. So here we go. We've logged in, again, using these same credentials as before. And again, we want to create a checkpoint to verify that John Smith's balance is correct. So the process here is exactly the same. I'm just going to click the Create Property Checkpoint button. And just like what you saw earlier, we'll drag this Finder tool over the control in question. And just like what you saw earlier, Test Complete's able to pick out all the individual controls inside the Windows application, just like it could inside the web application. All right, so here we go. I've selected the cache balance item. I'm going to release the mouse. And now Test Complete, again, will fetch back a reference to that particular control. And in this case, the control is just called balance. All right, so we've got that selected. Now we'll click Next. And we want to select a text property to verify within this control. But in looking at the list of available properties, you say, well, hey, wait a second, Nick. I don't see a text property. Okay, well, by default, we're only showing a small subset of the available properties. If the property that you're looking for isn't listed, click this Advanced View link, and that gives you a list of every single property that exists for that particular control. And so in this case, the control that we care about, or the property we care about, I should say, is this WPF control text. So I've got that selected, and we'll say next. And again, here's our summary. We're going to look at that balance control and make sure that its WPF control text property equals negative $1 million. All right, now we'll say finish. Okay, and then I'm going to log out of my application. Click this log out button, and then we'll stop recording. And again, Test Complete is going to take a moment, process all those actions, and then render them as a keyword test. And just like what you saw with the web-based test, we are recognizing all the controls based on their actual names. So we start out, we type inside the username field, and then we type inside the password field. We click the login button. We do our checkpoint, and then we click on rectangle 242. What? Rectangle 242? What in the heck is that? All right, well, this is where the visualizer comes in handy. Let's take a peek here. Rectangle 242 actually refers to the login log out button in the top right corner of the application. Now, here's the thing, folks. Just because Test Complete's going to use the actual name of the control as specified by the developers, well, that's not a guarantee that the developer gave the control a good name in the first place, and that's what we're encountering right now. So, what we can do here is rename this control within the context of Test Complete so that it makes more sense, because as I'm skimming through my test here, rectangle 242 doesn't mean anything to me. I'd rather that said something more like login, logout link. So here's how we're going to do that. I'm going to right-click on the control, and I'm going to say Show Object in Name Mapping Editor. Now, the name map is a collection of all the controls we've recorded against so far. And we store information about those controls here, like the name of the object and where it falls in the overall object hierarchy. But this panel down here also allows you to customize how Test Complete will refer to a particular control. So I think we can all agree that rectangle 242 is not an intuitive name for a particular control. So what I'm going to do is right-click on this guy, say rename, and let's change this to something totally crazy like, I don't know, login, logout button. All right, I'm going to press enter here now, and you're going to see a dialog box pop up on my screen. This dialog box says, hey, you're already using rectangle 242 in some of your tests. Do you want me to update those tests to reflect this new name? I'm going to say yes, please to that. All right, now we come back into our test case, and you can see Test Complete has updated our test to use that new name, login, logout button. The beauty of this is, if we had, say, 10 tests that all referred to rectangle 242, then all 10 of those tests would have been updated simultaneously. So you make the change once, and Test Complete pushes that change out to all the impacted test cases. This saves you the hassle of having to hunt through every test you've ever created, looking for every instance of a particular object. So you make the change once, Test Complete takes care of it for you from there, and that makes your test maintenance efforts a whole lot easier. All right, I see some folks are asking questions. That's fantastic. Keep those coming. I will be addressing all those shortly. But now somebody out there is saying, well, hey, Nick, what about code? You know, I'm the type of person who prefers to work in script. I like this keyword thing, but, you know, does Test Complete have anything for me? And the answer to that is absolutely. In fact, you can convert any keyword test that you have into a script-based test just by right-clicking on it and saying Convert to Script. And that'll take all your actions and render them as code. You remember at the beginning of the session, I chose JScript as my language of choice. What you're looking at right now is the JScript representation of that test that we just converted. While I'm inside the code editor, I can do things like set breakpoints just by clicking inside the gutter. I can create reusable function libraries. I can run code up to the cursor and then step through one line at a time. I can evaluate the values of variables. And the code editor also has code completion, so I can start typing the word log, for example. And then you can see here, Test Complete automatically pops up this code completion dialog, and then I can just press enter to autocomplete. We also have some really great context-sensitive help in here. So if you need more information about what the log message command does, for example, just put your cursor right inside that command, press F1, and then Test Complete pops up the help file to that command, which contains information about what the command does, the parameter it takes, and code snippets that you can just copy and paste into the editor. Well, you say, Nick, that's nice, but really I'd rather create my tests as scripts right from the get-go. I don't want to monkey around with this intermediate step of conversion. Can I do that? Well, yeah, sure. In fact, let's create our final test case where we verify the invalid username and password message. Let's do that as a script-based test. So I'm going to jump back over here to this page object, and I'm going to turn auto run back on because I actually do want to record against my browser. And now I'm going to come up here and I'm going to select record script from this little drop down. So now test complete again is going to go into record mode. It's going to relaunch our browser for us, and I'm going to try to log in with a bad set of credentials. So let's try to log in here as bad user with a password of bad. We click login, and there we go. We get the expected error message. So I'm just going to create another checkpoint, and I'm going to kind of blitz through this one because you guys have seen me do this a couple of times, and I don't want to bore anybody. I will say one thing that always scares me is I'm always worried one of my coworkers is going to actually go into my database and add a user called bad user so that this part of the demo would bomb out on me, but luckily nobody's done that to me yet. Alright, so I'm just verifying that inner text property again. We'll say finish, and we'll close the browser down and stop recording. Now again, test complete will take a moment, process all those actions, but this time around it's going to render them directly as code. And you can see right here, we are launching our browser, we're navigating out to our URL. This is all the same type of stuff as what we did inside the keyword-based test, just represented a little bit differently. Here's where we're typing in our username, our password, and here's where we're clicking login. Now I want to call your attention to any line that has this glyph next to it. That means that this line of code actually has a visualizer image associated with it. So if I click right here, you can see that just like what we have with the keyword test, we have visualizer images associated with the script-based tests. So you're always going to be able to see exactly what happened during the course of your recordings. Alright, so now we've got our 3 test cases created. What we want to do next is batch them up and run them as a group. So here's how we're going to do that. We click on this Organize Test button right here, and that brings up this test items palette. And what we can do is just drag the test that we want to run right from this tree onto this palette. So we're going to run test 2, then we'll run test 3, and I can also right-click here, say New Test Item, and then browse out to any test I've already created. For example, maybe I want to run this script-based test that we made. And there we go. And now, when we click this Run Project button right here, Test Complete will fire off, run each one of these tests in sequence, and then present us with that summary report, just like what we saw earlier today. So, as you can see, it's very easy to build out your test cases with Test Complete. I mean, this whole process took me, maybe 10, 15 minutes? And that's because I was stopping to narrate along the way. If I had just sat down and gone, it wouldn't have taken me any more than 2 or 3 minutes to set these tests up. Alright, so now, next thing I want to show you guys is how you can wire your test cases up to external data sources. Let's go back to our original test case here where we logged in as John Smith. Chances are you've got more than one user that you want to log in and verify. In fact, you may have a spreadsheet that contains a bunch of different usernames, password, and balance combinations, and you want to make sure that each one of these users can log in and that their balance is accurate. Well, Test Complete makes it very easy for you to work with external data sources like this. So let me walk you through the process right now. So first thing we need to do is select each action that we want each user in the spreadsheet to perform. So in this case, it's going to be from the time we click inside the username field until the time the user actually logs out of the site. So I just held down the Shift key while I arrowed down in order to select these items. Alright, so now we've got these items selected. I'm going to right-click and say Make Data Loop. And that's going to pop up this wizard. And Test Complete says, okay, we're going to talk to an external data source. How do you want to refer to the data in that data source? I'm going to call this my stock traders. And we'll say next. And now Test Complete lets you talk to 4 different types of external data sources. We can do Excel sheets, CSV files, any ODBC compliant database, or a special table variable, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. Alright, so I'm going to use Excel sheet here and click next. Test Complete says, fantastic, where's your Excel file live? Click this ellipses, browse out to my Excel file, there we go, and then we'll click next. Now, inside an Excel workbook, you can have multiple worksheets. Test Complete is smart enough to know that, and so right now we're being presented with a list of worksheets that lives inside that workbook. The one I want to use is called balance info. So I'm going to select that and click next. Now, if you've got a lot of records in your spreadsheet, like maybe you've got, I don't know, 10,000 records, and you only want to use a subset of those records, you can fill that range in here. Maybe you only want to use record 300 through 500. Just go ahead and fill that into those fields. But I'm going to use the defaults, which is to use everything, and click next. And this final screen is where we're going to update the hard-coded values in the test with the values from the spreadsheet. So here we go. Right here, we're typing in John Smith into our username field. Well, I'm going to click on this value column, and you can see Test Complete's giving me a list of all the columns from my spreadsheet. So now I can say, all right, I want the username column, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the password. We're going to use what's in the password column. And this works inside checkpoints too. We're going to make sure that the value from the balance column is there. All right, now we say finish. And there we go. Now you can see that Test Complete has inserted this data-driven loop operation, and it's going to perform this action over and over again, and it's going to substitute the values that we got from the spreadsheet inside our test. You can see right here, variables, username, variables, password. So instead of using hard-coded John Smith and pass123, we're going to read the values directly in from the spreadsheet. So it's very easy for you to wire up to an external data source. But now somebody out there may be saying, well, that's nice, Nick, but you know what? Making those data sources is a pain in the rear end. Does Test Complete have any data generation capabilities that I could take advantage of? Why, yes, as a matter of fact, it does. Come on up here to the Tools Generate Data section, and that's going to pop up this wizard that says, okay, we're going to create a table variable or an Excel sheet. You can pick whichever one you want to use. I'm going to create a table variable here. Say next. And what we want to do is define how many columns will live in our table. So let's say we want 3 columns. I'm just going to click this Insert button a couple of times. There we go. And let's say we want the following data. We want username column, we want an email address column, and we want a phone number column. All right? So now we've got our columns defined. Well, now we can specify what kind of data is going to go in those columns. Test Complete has 19 predefined data types that you can take advantage of. So we want usernames? No problem. Click Name. And we can even configure those names further. We can say just male names, just female names, or we can have just first or last names, your choice. Then we want to do email addresses. There we go. And we want to do telephone numbers. There we go. And again, we could configure that as well. We could have the phone number formatted according to any one of these patterns. All right. Now, down here, you can specify how many rows will be generated inside your table. Let's keep the default of 100. And here we go. Count with me, folks. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Okay, so about 2.75 Mississippis later, we now have a 3-column table with 100 rows in it, and it's a bunch of unique usernames, email addresses, and phone numbers that I can use as input into my tests. So not only can Test Complete data drive those tests for you, but it can actually build the data that you'll be using within the test cases themselves. All right, fantastic. Question for you guys now. How many of you out there, regardless of if you're doing a Windows or a web-based test, how many of you have a database backend that you need to do verifications against? Just go ahead and type the word database or DB into the Q&A panel there. Maybe you're using SQL Server, maybe you're using Oracle or MySQL or something like that. All right, bunch of folks chiming in here. Jenna, Walter, Rodney, Leanne, Jack, Gabriella, Tien, fantastic. All right, so of you folks who are working with databases, give me a feel for your comfort level in writing SQL queries. Would you say that you are a novice user? Are you an intermediate user? Are you a god or goddess of SQL and you write queries for breakfast? Give me a feel for where you fall on the spectrum there. Okay, a couple folks chiming in at beginner, a couple folks in on intermediate, advanced. Okay, cool. All right, so pretty broad spectrum here. That's fantastic. All right. Well, regardless of your skill level, Test Complete provides a couple of different ways that you can use to work with databases in your tests, and I'd like to show those off to you right now. So for starters, we have a special checkpoint called a database table checkpoint. And what this allows me to do is connect up to any database that I've got on my network and verify information inside of it. Now, the Stock Trader application we've been working with today has a SQL Server backend associated with it, but everything that I'm doing right now could just as easily be done for MySQL or Oracle or what have you. So inside the Stock Trader database, there's a table called holding, and I want to connect up to that holding table. So to do that, I could either specify a full-blown connection string that I could get from my DBA, or I can use a pre-existing ODBC data source which I've got right here. And if your data source requires credentials, just fill those in accordingly. And I'll spell my password right, which will help. There we go. Now you can verify the contents of a table, a view, or the result set of a custom query. I'm going to say custom query here and click next. All right, now, for those of you who are in the intermediate to advanced bracket of SQL writers, you could actually fill in your query here. Select star from whatever, where, whatever. But if you're a novice in SQL, or if you're like me and you can't remember your database table structure, Test Complete allows you to build your queries visually by clicking this design button. And that's going to pop up this list of all the tables and views that live inside your database. So I'm going to scroll down here until I find my holding table. There it is. All right, so I've got that selected, and I'm actually going to drag that right from this list onto this palette right here. And that shows me a list of all the columns that live inside my database. So I can just pick and choose whichever columns I want to work with. Let's say we want to use the purchase price, the quantity, and the quote symbol. So I check those boxes, and you can see down here, Test Complete is building the query for me based on my selections. So I don't need to know SQL syntax. I don't really even need to know my table structure. I just need to know which table I want to work with, and then I can pick and choose from there. All right, so once you've got your query created, come on up here to SQL, Execute SQL. That'll give you a list of all the rows that get returned based on your query. And assuming that's the information you're expecting to find, we can just click this Save button and then finish walking through the wizard. And what Test Complete does is it takes all of the records that came back from the query and it stores them off as a baseline for future comparison in your project. So here, let's have some fun. I'm going to force a failure. Let's say that instead of S:4, we're expecting to have Aperture stock. All right, and got that. Now I'm going to run this checkpoint. And what Test Complete will do is query the live database, take the result set that it gets back from that database, and compare it to the stored values that you've got here. And you can see we've got a failure, and the failure is saying that the quote symbol field of row 4 contains a value that's different from the stored one. So not only do we know that, yes, there's a mismatch, but we also know exactly which row is mismatched, which column within that row is mismatched, what we were expecting to find, and what we actually found. So it's very easy for you to verify large amounts of data quickly using the database table checkpoint. And if we had had multiple failures here, if 4 or 5 stocks hadn't matched up, then we would see an entry in the log for each one of those failures. So it's not like you'd fail the first record and then have to run the test again to find out that a second record had failed. All right, so that's one way you can work with databases. The other way is via scripting. All of the languages that Test Complete supports have full ADO support inside of them. So I'm going to press Control-J on my keyboard here to get a little code snippet that I'm going to drop in. And this code snippet is basically programmatically connecting up to an ODBC data source. That's what's happening here on line 62. And then here on line 74, I'm running a simple select statement. But you know what? I could run anything from here. If I want to run a stored procedure, execute spmyproc, go ahead. You want to populate a database with values prior to running a test. No problem. Insert into. In fact, folks, I recommend you look for places like this in your testing. Back when I was an end user, I had this one particular test. It took 40 minutes to prep the environment to run the test. And then the test itself only took 5 minutes to run. So by automating the prep, which was basically just populating the database with insert into commands, we saved a whole lot more time than if we'd only automated the test itself. And hey, in the same vein, you want to clean the database up after a test is finished? No sweat, delete from. My personal favorite, extreme negative testing. What happens when the database just disappears? Well, that's where drop commands come in. So anything you'd normally be able to do from the SQL Query Analyzer or the Toad interface or whatever your tool of choice is, you can do within Test Complete as well. All right, now I'm going to jump back into my slides. I see some more questions coming in. Keep those coming. I will be addressing those in just a few minutes. But just to sum up how Test Complete can help you. By automating your tests with Test Complete, you free yourself from those monotonous, mind-numbing tasks. This gives you more time to focus on more interesting testing activities. You can go do some exploratory testing, do some pairs testing with your developers, or you can spend some time getting to know your end user base better so you can adapt your tests to more real-world scenarios. Ultimately, this leads to higher confidence in the product that you're shipping because you'll have been able to do more thorough, comprehensive testing in a given release cycle. So now you may be thinking, well, this is great, Nick, but what about my stuff? Will Test Complete work with the technologies my program is built on? Will it run on the environments I need to support? All right, well, let's talk about those things now. In terms of operating systems, Test Complete runs on Windows XP up through Windows 7. So that includes Vista, Server 2003, and Server 2008. This means that you can record a test on Vista and then replay that same test against Windows 7. So now not only is Test Complete doing the tedious tasks for you, it's running them on all the operating systems you support. And both the 32-bit and 64-bit flavors of these operating systems are supported, so Test Complete can handle any environment that a Windows shop could possibly need. So now let's take this a step further. Let's say you've got all your various operating system combinations set up and ready to go, like in this graphic right here. Using a feature called distributed testing, you can launch tests remotely on other Test Complete systems. So here's me, right? And I click a button on my Test Complete machine, and it calls out to these other Test Complete machines, and it says, okay guys, run these tests, ready, set, go. And then as those tests run, I actually get a remote desktop window show up inside Test Complete that allows me to monitor the run status of each one of those systems. And then when the tests finish, each one of those machines sends a copy of their log file down to my system, so I can easily review the status of every one of the systems right from the comfort of my own cube without having to jump up and run all over the office. Now, in terms of supported technologies, Test Complete works very well with applications written in things like Visual C++, Visual Basic, and Delphi. We also have full support for the .NET family of languages, and Test Complete supports all versions of the .NET framework all the way up through version 4. Test Complete also lets you test Java applets and applications. We support Swing, AWT, and JavaFX, and it's even possible to automate Microsoft Office, Fox Pro, and Sybase Power Builder applications. So Test Complete lets you work with programs built in a wide variety of languages. This means that whether you're testing a legacy application or something bleeding edge, Test Complete will be able to help you. Now, we've seen a bit today about how Test Complete can perform functional web testing. We support Internet Explorer 6 through 9 and Firefox 3.5 through 4. And in terms of supported web technologies, Test Complete works well with things like PHP, Cold Fusion, ASP, ASP.NET, and we work with rich Internet applications like Flex, Flash, Ajax, and Silverlight, and hey, we do plain old HTML too. Handful of other features I'd like to mention here. Test Complete has a full command line interface, which allows you to call Test Complete tests from other programs like CruiseControl.net, for example. So if you've got a continuous integration server set up, you can have Test Complete get invoked every time a build finishes, and that way, your whole build and testing process gets a lot more streamlined. We have a runtime license called Test Execute. This lets you run Test Complete tests on machines that don't need a full Test Complete license. So if you have a lab or a bunch of virtual machines whose sole purpose is to just be test runners, then you can run those tests via Test Execute. Last thing I want to mention on this slide is a library control called Test Recorder. And it's important to note that this is different from the recordings you've seen me do today. Test Recorder is a library that you embed inside your own applications to give those applications Test Complete-like functionality. So, Nick, why would I want to do this? Okay, let's say that one of your customers has called up your support team one day with this really weird issue that you can't reproduce. And after talking with your support team a little more, you think, maybe our customer isn't telling us everything that they're doing to cause the problem. Well, that's where Test Recorder comes in. You have your customer activate Test Recorder and then walk through the series of actions that leads up to the issue. As they do that, Test Recorder is logging their actions out to a file. They take that file, email it to you. You import the file into Test Complete, and Test Complete converts it into a full-blown Test Complete test that you can replay to see exactly what your customer is doing. But here's where it gets even better. Let's say that what your customer has found isn't some screwball fringe case issue. It's a really, really big regression that's going to impact a large amount of your user base. Well, guess what? Your customer just wrote the regression test for you. So now all you got to do is make sure you add that test to your list of test items, and you'll be ensuring that that bug doesn't resurface in subsequent releases.